History tells the story of the world and of our lives. Sometimes that history goes bump in the night. Broadcasting from the center of oddity and the supernatural in Central Florida, it's the History Goes Bump podcast.
Hello, you spectacular people. Welcome to this 556th episode of the History Goes Bump podcast. Ghost Tours for the Theater of the Mind. I'm your host, Diane.
And this is Kelly.
Kelly, on this episode, we're heading into Nashville to a very beautiful and historic mansion there called the Belmont Mansion. It's got lots of great ghost stories about a woman who had built this mansion. She's got an interesting history to her as well, and apparently she loved it so much she's come back in the afterlife.
Oh, looking forward to digging into this one.
Before we get into that, we want to welcome into the spectacular crew, Felicia.
Thank you so much for joining our Facebook group.
And now, this moment in Oddity.
The moment in Oddity was suggested by Lynn Beasley. There's a pub called Three Stags' Heads located in Wardlow Myers, just outside of Derbyshire, England. The structure is a longhouse that was built in the mid to late 18th century with a simple whitewashed exterior. The facade is adorned with three stag skulls, hence the name, while the interior harkens back to days gone by, where it is said that modern phones and such are not allowed. There are various versions of lurcher dog art to be seen as well as consumed. It is said that their dark lurcher beer is quite strong. They serve other local brews and food as well. One item within the pub, however, is quite unique, at least to modern times. Within a glass case in a corner sits a mummified cat. The animal was found inside the chimney and is said to have been placed there to ward off evil spirits. There are some European cultures that would often place a deceased cat within a building's walls. This was done because of the belief that cats were thought to bring good luck to people residing in a building and that the cats could ward off bad luck. Most accounts have shown that this practice proved to have used felines that had previously passed away before being concealed within a building structure. Regardless, finding a mummified cat within the walls of a building certainly is odd.
Are you afraid of the dark?
And now, this month in history.
In the month of September, on the 13th in 1971, New York State Police stormed Attica Correctional Facility. A riot of inmates began on the 9th in the overcrowded prison with 1,281 inmates at the maximum security institution, taking over a large portion of the facility. The rioters were seeking to negotiate to improve conditions and treatment at the prison. The police were able to retake most of the facility on the 9th. However, the rioters moved to an exercise field called D Yard, and there they held 39 prison guards and employees hostage for 4 days. Prior to that, one guard was beaten to death. Eventually, negotiations stagnated, and the New York governor issued a mandate to regain control of the prison by force. On the morning of September 13th, a final notice was read to the inmates by police, ordering a surrender. The convicts responded by holding knives to their hostages' throats. Shortly thereafter, helicopters flew overhead and dropped tear gas. During the melee, officers fired 3,000 shots, killing 29 of the inmates and 10 of the hostages, while wounding 89 others. Many of the deaths and injuries happened during the initial gunfire. However, some inmates were shot and killed after they surrendered. The resulting deaths of both prisoners and hostages caused condemnation by the public and prompted a congressional investigation. It was not until January 2000 that New York State settled a 26-year-old class action lawsuit that had been filed by the Attica inmates against prison and state officials. The payout totaled $8 million that was then given to former and current inmates.
The Belmont Mansion is haunted by a woman who knew devastating loss, Adelicia Hayes Franklin Acklen Cheatham. That's a lot of surnames because there were a lot of marriages. The mansion is located in Nashville and is now part of the Belmont University Campus. This is an elaborate antebellum villa that served as a summer respite from the Louisiana heat, and it just might be a respite for Adelicia in the afterlife. Join us for the history and hauntings of the Belmont Mansion.
The story of Belmont Mansion begins and ends with Adelicia Acklen. Her parents were lawyer and minister Oliver Bliss and Sarah Hightower Hayes, and she was born on March 15, 1817 in Nashville. This early Nashville was a couple years from the first steamboat arriving, which would bring the town out of isolation and start its build into a big city. Adelicia was raised in Nashville and attended the Nashville Female Academy. It would be after her graduation that tragedy would begin in her life. She met a man named Alfonso Gibbs, and the two became engaged. Gibbs never made it to the altar, dying before the wedding. A new love would come into her life in 1839 when she was 22. This was a wealthy slave trader and planter named Isaac Franklin. The slave trade he owned was one of the largest in the South. He was 28 years Adelicia's senior, and the couple had 4 children. Victoria, Adelicia, and we're going to call her Junior because same name, but I want to differentiate between the two, Julius and Emma. And Julius, his middle name was Caesar.
Oh, goodness.
Tragedy struck again as Julius lost his life in 1844 at birth. 2 years later, Adelicia Sr. would lose Victoria to croup, Adelicia Jr. to bronchitis, and her husband, Isaac. So she lost 3 members of her family there. She wasn't yet 30 years of age. Just horrible.
Yeah, very sad.
And she would now be the wealthiest woman in Tennessee. Isaac Franklin passed on to her the Fairview Plantation in Tennessee, 4 cotton plantations in Louisiana, some land in Texas, stocks, bonds, and hundreds of enslaved people.
In 1849, she met and married attorney Joseph A.S. Acklen, who hailed from Huntsville, Alabama. Huntsville had been founded by and named for his grandfather, John Hunt. He was born a year after Adelicia and started at the University of Alabama at the age of 14. He went to fight in the Texas Revolution in 1835 and served under Colonel James W. Fannin, Jr. Nearly the entire company was executed at Goliad, Texas on March 27, 1836, but Joseph had already left for home and escaped the massacre. He studied law in Huntsville, and President Martin Van Buren appointed him the United States Attorney for the North Alabama Judicial District in 1840. He visited Nashville in April of 1847 and attended a ball where he met the recently widowed Adelicia Franklin. They started a long-distance relationship, and within 2 years, Joseph had moved to Nashville to marry Adelicia. And an interesting note here is that Adelicia basically got him to sign a prenuptial agreement that stated she would retain ownership and control of all the property she brought to the marriage, and Joseph agreed.
She must have been good looking. A good woman, because I can't think of many men at that time that would be like, oh, sure, because generally speaking, with a marriage, he would have had control of all of that property.
Well, he must have really loved her.
Yeah. The couple decided to build Belmont Mansion in Nashville and began construction in 1850 on 175 acres. The mansion was originally called Belmonte, and it's Belle, and then a second word Monte, or Beautiful Mountain, and sat on this hilltop. This would take 10 years, and when it was finished, it was the largest home in Tennessee at the time. It was designed by architect Adolphus Hyman in the Italian villa style and included 36 rooms. The grand salon was really something and was designed to impress. The room was larger than most people's homes, and featured a column chamber that was filled with natural light from floor to ceiling windows, and the barrel vaulted ceiling that rose 20 feet was adorned with a dramatic painted sky. A 6-foot cast iron fountain provided natural water sounds. The walls featured carved woodwork and painted finishes. All first-floor rooms connected to the grand salon. A stairway connected the grand salon to the private bedrooms upstairs, and the upper hall had access via another stairway to the cupola, which was a full-on octagonal room that could be opened up in the summer months to cool the house and provided a view of the grounds. There was also a telescope in the room. They have refurbished a bunch of these rooms. I will be sure to share pictures on Instagram. Oh my gosh, we have got to see the inside of this place.
The central parlor had an optical illusion on the ceiling to make people think they are sitting in a Roman palazzo. The original mirror and Cornelius & Company gas chandelier still remain in this room. The parlor still has 8 of the 12 pieces of the Acklen's parlor suite. The grounds themselves were beautiful with gardens and gazebos, a water tower, a 200-foot-long greenhouse and conservatory, bathhouse, bowling alley, art gallery, and even a zoo. The Gardener's Monthly featured an article about the greenhouse at Belmont in 1868, describing it as built of iron, was truly a crystal palace, with its high dome and spacious wings. The greenhouse had plants from all around the world, with a 2-story conservatory in the center. A furnace under the greenhouse helped control the temperatures. The heat from the furnace would rise through the vents in the floor, providing climate control. The mansion really was a showplace, and the family even opened the gardens and zoo up to the public.
You love your plants. What would you think about having this 200-foot-long greenhouse?
Oh my gosh, I would lose my mind.
Conservatory in the middle.
And a zoo.
Oh, I know. I mean, they didn't have a whole lot of animals there, but it was a neat little menagerie, and you can imagine the people that lived here in Nashville, they were seeing these plants and animals that they'd never seen before, so it was probably a real treat for them. The couple had 6 children, Joseph, William, Claude, Pauline, and Laura and Corinne, who were twins. The twins were named for her sister. Tragedy struck again in 1855 when the last surviving child from her first marriage, Emma, passed away from diphtheria. The Acklens commissioned a painting from the artist, and I'm not sure how to say this name because there's not a vowel between the G and the S, but it's like Gustwit, that was described in the Daily Picayune as, "The child is reclining on a sofa and seems to be just awakening from a pleasant dream, of which the last scene is just fading away. From the clouds in the background, we see the vanishing form of an angel emerge, clasping the hand of the unconscious child and pointing to the future. We need only to add that the child soon after died." This portrait was hung in the library of the mansion, but no longer exists, which is a real bummer. It sounds like it was a cool painting. At this point, Adelicia has lost all 4 of her first children, but 1855 wasn't done with her. The twins, Laura and Corinne, died from scarlet fever at the age of 3. So she's lost 6 children at this point. Adelicia would take a trip to Europe after the Civil War and bought a sculpture featuring 2 little girls cuddling each other, and she had it inscribed with Laura and Corinne.
As we mentioned, there was an art gallery on the property, and Adelicia and Joseph amassed quite the art collection. This was the first major art collection in Nashville, and the couple loaned their collection to various exhibitions. Adelicia was even appointed by the governor in 1875 to serve on a committee that decided what art pieces would represent Tennessee at an exhibit held in Philadelphia for the United States Centennial. She became very involved in charity work and was elected treasurer for the Lady Soldiers Friends Society in 1861. The Nashville Refugee Clothing Association was an organization that supported refugees of the Civil War, and Adelicia served on its board in 1864. She donated to orphanages, purchased city bonds for post-war redevelopment in Nashville, invested in the Maxwell House Hotel, and in the 1880s served on the board of directors for the Working Women Exchange. Adelicia loved to entertain. There were cotillions and galas and balls, and most were held out in the gardens under the full moon. She would pick different themes for the parties and use exotic decor like Japanese lanterns to light the festivities.
She had a lot of statuary of Greek and Roman gods and stuff, too. There were a lot of people that said that she was into the occult and had decor that showed that, but I didn't see a whole lot of proof of that other than she had, statuary of these gods and stuff. The Civil War brought change for the Acklens and strife. Tennessee seceded from the Union in June of 1861. Joseph paid to get a Tennessee militia armed and in uniforms. He got little thanks for that when nearby Fort Donelson fell, and the Confederate Army decided not to defend Nashville. Adelicia stayed at Belmont, but Joseph ran to Louisiana to run the plantations they had there. About a third of Nashville's population left. Now, before you think Joseph ran off scared, he actually went to a worse situation. One of the plantations was on the Mississippi River, and this area was controlled by federal gunboats. The Confederates liked to cross here, though, so skirmishes happened often. On top of that, both sides wanted to burn the cotton on the plantation because they didn't want either side to benefit from it. Joseph was trying to protect around 8,500 bales of cotton. The Union came to him and offered to protect the cotton, but Joseph didn't want the Confederates to retaliate against him. The Union did eventually provide protection against his will. Despite being only 45, Joseph was sick, tired, and so arthritic he couldn't write by 1863. He asked a friend to write a letter for him to Adelicia that the South was going to lose the war and slavery would be over, and he was happy that this was going to be the case. Joseph then died of malaria, and Adelicia had lost her second husband.
This left Adelicia in a quandary. The cotton down in Louisiana was worth a lot of money. A story told about her is that she traveled secretly down to Louisiana and used her beauty and charm to get both sides of the war to help her with the cotton. She convinced a Confederate general she was friendly with not to burn the bales of cotton, and then she contracted with a Yankee wagon train to transport the cotton to a New Orleans port. This was with the help of a Union admiral she was friendly with. The only problem was getting the cotton from the plantation to that port without having rebels rob the train. Somehow she managed to convince some Confederate soldiers to escort the cotton on the train. Neither side knew that she was working both sides. The cotton made it to New Orleans and was sold to the Rothschilds in London for nearly $1 million in gold. That would be worth nearly $17 million today.
So you can see why she made the effort to get down there and do this.
Certainly.
Now, I use the verbiage that she was friendly with this Confederate general and this Union admiral. A lot of
How
people...
much do we read into that?
I don't know. There are people who insinuate that the friendly with was really, really friendly. I don't know. Obviously, she worked this Confederate militia also, so I'm not sure what all was entailed here. A lot of people refer to her as being similar to Scarlett O'Hara. There must be something about her that was just, she had her womanly ways about her, and she managed to...
Quite beguiling.
Yes, put men around her finger and get them to do what she wanted, apparently. The couple's eldest son, Joseph, was off at military school during much of the Civil War. He then went overseas to colleges in France and Switzerland and returned to Tennessee to finish his law degree in 1871 at Cumberland College, School of Law in Lebanon, Tennessee. He set up shop in Memphis and married a woman there named Hattie Bethel, and then moved to her sugar plantation in Pattersonville, St. Mary Parish, Louisiana. Hattie became pregnant shortly thereafter and died in childbirth. The baby also passed, so he's knowing some of his own personal tragedies. So she's got her eldest now, and he's having his own issues. Joseph Jr. stayed on at the plantation until 1884 and served in politics in Louisiana. He moved back to Nashville in 1884 to practice law again and lived at Belmont until it was sold in 1887. He married again and had 8 children and passed away in 1938. So it turned out good for him in the end.
Adelicia would marry for a third time in 1867 to a doctor named William Archer Cheatham. He was a medical reformer and ran the Tennessee Insane Asylum. While there, he implemented the most advanced theories of moral treatment for the mentally ill that had been developed during the 19th century. Dorothea Dix considered the Tennessee hospital the most superior for mental health, and it really was one of the best in the nation.
If you've got her endorsing you, you know it's got to be a good place.
Yep. Cheatham's first wife had passed in 1864, and he brought 2 children into the marriage, Martha and Richard. He established a private practice in Nashville and worked at that until his death in 1900. Adelicia remained at Belmont Mansion until 1884 when she left for Florida with her 3 other adult children. The following spring, they went to Washington, D.C., and this is where Adelicia died in May 1887.
And I do want to jump in here. I saw multiple stories about her death. I saw some that said Washington, D.C. I saw another one that said that she was in New York City shopping and died there. Whatever's the case, she was living in Washington, D.C. at the time of her death.
Before her death, she sold Belmont Mansion to a developer who sold 15 acres of the land and the mansion to 2 women from Philadelphia. They opened a school for young women called Belmont College in 1890. This merged with Ward Seminary in 1913 and became a junior college named Ward Belmont. Minnie Pearl graduated from here, as did Mary Martin.
And for young people who don't know who Mary Martin is, my dad adored her and said she was the best Peter Pan ever.
In 1951, the school changed ownership and is today Belmont University, which reopened as a coeducational liberal arts school offering bachelor and graduate degrees.
Kelly, I tried to look up what had happened here between Adelicia and William because he didn't die until 1900, but she moves to Washington, D.C. with 3 of her children in 1884. So I don't know if they, had separated, if they just weren't living together anymore. I don't know what happened there, but
maybe he was running his doctor business and
that could be, and he couldn't leave. And I don't know if she went to Florida for health reasons or something.
And now a little break for a word about one of our sponsors.
Today, Belmont Mansion is open as a museum and conducts tours under the care of the Belmont Mansion Association. For years, they have painstakingly, and I mean painstakingly, restored and refurbished the mansion, and it is gorgeous. Still has work to be done, but what they have done, they'll show the before and after pictures. Wow. And that grand salon, I mean, just to get to, take pictures in there would be amazing. Such a wonderful room. Many pieces of furniture belong to Adelicia's family. The rose garden remains, although it is only about a quarter of the size it had once been. There were roses of every color here, and many were show-worthy. A freedom fountain has been installed where some of the enslaved cabins would have been at one time. Some of those people included, and I believe their names are engraved on the fountain, Brutus Jackson, Francis Jackson, Aggie, Fred, Ben Gant, George, Rena Gibbs, Julia Ann, Mortimer, Randolph, Rose, Sally, Manuela and her 2 children, Betsy and her children, Alexander, Amanda, Harriet, Ivy, James, and Joseph, and Maria and her children, Ezekiel or Zeke, Marianne, and William. They've done a great job at the mansion with digging into the history of the enslaved who were here. There are names of other enslaved people who had been at the other Acklen plantations on the fountain as well. This is John Baker, Betsy or Betty Baker, Ruffin, Georgina, Eva Snowden Baker, and London.
Very nice. The East Campus entrance for the university had once been the service drive and entrance. Delivery vehicles would damage the oyster shell-lined carriage drive, so this separate drive was created with an entrance on the east side of the house where the kitchen was located. A white Italian marble fountain is still located in front of the mansion and was installed in 1857. And guess what? It actually still works, and is said to be the oldest operational fountain in its original location in the American South.
That blows my mind. 1857 and a fountain still going. Nowadays, you put a fountain in your backyard and you're lucky if it lasts 10 years.
True. A water tower fed water via gravity to this fountain and 2 others. And there is also a cast and wrought iron gazebo that dates to 1853 that was bought out of the Janes Beebe and Company of New York catalog. The center featured a large cast iron outdoor aquarium filled with gold and silver fish. The original aviary is still here and would have been filled with exotic birds that included a white owl Adelicia had received as a gift. So I'm guessing a snowy owl?
Yeah, I would guess so. Unexplained things have happened in this house for a very long time. Adelicia herself claimed that she was haunted by the spirits of her twin daughters. She kept the room as it had been when they were alive, and she would spend hours in there running her hands over the furniture. She would tell friends that she sometimes heard their laughter. The main spirit here is thought to be Adelicia, though. Faculty and students have both claimed to see her disembodied spirit. One employee claimed that she was walking down a hallway, cleaning up and checking things after an event, when she ran into the apparition of Adelicia, who was wearing an elegant evening gown. On another occasion, a tour guide saw the spirit of Adelicia and was told that the furniture in one of the bedrooms was not in its proper place.
Oh my.
Get that fixed. That's not the way I had it.
Very particular. Adelicia seems to gravitate towards holiday seasons and so is most often seen around Christmas. People believe this is because the university conducts an elaborate ceremony in which a massive tree is set up in the main hallway and a chorus descends the stairway dressed in period clothing and carrying lit candles. Adelicia would have loved this kind of pomp and circumstance. Thoughts as to why she would be here in spirit include her sadness over the loss of her children, and possibly that she was greedy and unwilling to give up her earthly treasures. Haunted Nashville, written by Frankie and Kim Meredith Harris in 2009, has some great ghost stories, and this is one connected with the Christmas hauntings.
During the days of preparation, countless students have claimed to hear her. One such evening in the ladies' sitting room, students were busy preparing ribbons, pulling ornaments from last year's boxes, and unraveling garland with their supplies sprawled out on long tables. From above, they heard footsteps crossing the floor. The conversation stopped. The students looked at each other as the footsteps made their way across the ceiling, stopped for a moment, and then came back in the direction that it had started. It was almost as if someone was pacing the floor. The students took a mental roll of everyone in the ladies' sitting room and realized that everyone was accounted for. Late at night, the doors were locked, leaving only the students who were preparing for the upcoming festivities inside. "Did you hear that?" one of the girls asked, knowing the others had. A few nodded a silent confirmation. The footsteps started up again. "Maybe we should go look," one of the boys said, more as a question than a statement. A little frightened, but mostly curious, they went upstairs to investigate. They could each feel the adrenaline and nervous energy of the moment as they approached the door. They realized that the room the sound had been coming from was the former master bedroom of Adelicia Acklen. The students hesitated at the door for a brief instant. Finally, one of the young men in the group stepped from behind and boldly approached the door. He turned the knob and opened the door, looking back briefly with an expression that said, "I'll do it since no one else will." He strode inside with everyone following close behind. You could just see them all glued to each other.
Yeah.
It's like Scooby-Doo.
Right.
Here we go. The room was empty and still except for the slight movement of the curtains. This was probably caused by an air duct or a breeze from outside, but maybe. The same young man who had opened the door also made his way toward the window, obviously thinking along the same lines as the others. He grabbed the curtain as if to pull it back and paused a beat, building up the tension from the others. Everyone seemed to be holding their breath. He pulled back on the drapes, revealing nothing but the bare trees outside. Relieved to a certain extent, they made their way back downstairs to their work. They soon forgot about the footsteps and were back to the decorations, gossiping and joking as they worked. It was not long before the footsteps returned. This time, no one went upstairs to check. They told each other it was because there was no point. They had, after all, checked fruitlessly once before. But secretly they knew it was because they didn't want to discover what they might find.
I would imagine.
And they share these other stories as well. Others have confirmed this story in the years since. The footsteps are most often heard from the ladies' sitting room, although they've been heard in a few other areas of the mansion as well. Another male student reported not hearing Adelicia but feeling her presence. On the staircase near her bedroom, he said he felt like someone brushed by him, and then again a few minutes later. Chilled by the encounter, he later believed it to be the spirit of Adelicia. There are also instances of her essence being captured on film. The former director, Terry Parker, related one such story. The director said that on one occasion, while taking a tour of the mansion, he took a picture of his friends near a mirror in the home. To his amazement, there was an extra person in his photograph. Near the mirror appeared the image of a woman who looked very similar to Adelicia. Another similar experience involved a legend surrounding the mantel clock in the home. It was said that on the day, and at the precise moment that Joseph Acklen was slain in battle, the clock on the mantel quit working. And I have no idea what this story is talking about because Joseph Acklen was not killed in battle.
Right.
So, superstition among the house servants of that day was that if the clock was placed in Joseph's personal sitting room, it would start ticking again as if it were brand new. One undergraduate was taking photos of the mansion for the next year's annual. He noticed the clock and recalled the myth he had heard about as a freshman. Impulsively, he hung the camera around his neck and made his way towards the mantel. His eyes darted back and forth briefly. For a second, he wondered what kind of reprimand he might receive for touching the clock. He figured the risk to be low and lifted the clock off the mantel. It was lighter than he would have guessed, and he made his way toward Joseph's sitting room. He would have looked like some kind of storefront looter if anyone passed by, but they didn't. The photographer carefully placed the clock on the mantel. He stepped back from it to see if it was centered. What happened next was shocking. Although he knew a little of the legend, he never actually expected the minute hand to move, but it did. The minute hand moved one space, landing at 2 minutes past 1. There was almost a small whine as if the clock was taking in a breath, and then the ticking started. The surprising ticking sound seemed very loud to him, and in his brief panic he wondered if someone else, a curious professor perhaps, might come in to find the sophomore rearranging furniture. This was of course not possible. The sound was faint, only exaggerated in his mind by his surprise. Before he knew it, he was holding up his camera and snapping away. He felt a strange buzz in the air, unsure at the time if it was his own adrenaline or something else. After a roll was gone, he lowered the camera and looked back at the clock, which now said it was 2:04. In an instant, it struck him. He held out his left arm to view his wristwatch. 2:04. He could feel his knees buckle a bit. It seemed to him that the stories were true, but before he could consider any further, he heard footsteps echoing down the hall. He rushed over to the mantel and lifted the clock. The ticking stopped immediately. Maybe his moving the clock had jarred something free, allowing it to work again for a few brief minutes, or then again, maybe not. It occurred to him to put the clock back on the mantel to see if it would start up again, but he knew he didn't have that much time. He thought he could hear voices. He placed the clock back on its original mantel, and within seconds the voices that he had heard entered the room. It was a group of incoming freshmen being led on the tour by a university representative. The group's guide was speaking to the group, walking backwards so she could face them. The photographer passed them, going the opposite direction. The group looked at him curiously. Even the confident-sounding guide seemed to pause a moment when she saw him. On his way out, he passed by a mirror, and upon seeing himself there, he realized why. His cheeks were bright red, which always happened when he was nervous or excited, and there were beads of sweat dripping down his face. He was anxious, of course, after he got out of the house to see what kind of pictures he got. As the first photograph began to come to life, even under the red lights of the dark room, he knew something was not right. The clock began to appear, but so did someone else. The unmistakable shape of a human emerged. It soon became clear that it was a woman, although she wore what looked like a cloak. He fell back a step, steadying his hand on the wall. If he could have seen himself right then, he knew his cheeks would have been embarrassingly red. No one else was there when he took the picture. He was positive of that. He shared the picture with others, and soon the picture was well known around campus. And about that story about Joseph, I recall now, because I'm like, where in the world is this coming from? When I was doing the research, I did see that there were these legends that Joseph Acklen had been killed when he went down to the Louisiana plantations to protect the cotton, but everything says that's
He
official
died of malaria.
documentation. So a woman named Mrs. Moore used to live adjacent to the mansion as part of her financial compensation for working for the university. Over the years, she complained that the ghosts kept her awake on many nights. The noises were so frustrating for her that she eventually moved out for good. And apparently it was because these cotillions were still going on in the middle of the night. A similar experience involved the historic Belmont Auxiliary. Many of the members stayed in guest rooms during the restoration. Tools and equipment kept disappearing from the house. This led to finger-pointing and suspicion amongst the laborers. But at night, some of them reported hearing what sounded like a party. They could hear the clinking of glasses, distant laughter, and what sounded like hoop skirts dragging the ground. These noises all came from the direction of the ballroom. Upon entry, the ballroom always proved to be vacant. It appears that some of the party's guests have had such a wonderful time that they refused to leave. So those were just some really interesting stories shared by Frankie and Kim Harris.
David Weatherly wrote on the Eerie Lights blog in 2019, Susan, who shared her ghostly encounter with me, had spent a lot of time at Belmont in the early 2000s, and it was during this period that she had her own run-ins with the spirit of Adelicia. As she reports, I was friends with one of the security guards at the time, and he worked in the mansion and on its grounds. He would tell me quite often how the motion detectors would go off in the middle of the night when the building was completely empty. They would investigate, of course, and find nothing. They'd have to reset all the alarms. A friend of mine had sworn to me that she had seen the ghost of the woman, Adelicia, right outside the building one night, a ghost that she swore vanished when she was looking at her. I was doubtful and thought maybe she had just been up many hours studying, or maybe she had been drinking or something, but she always swore she'd had nothing to drink and wasn't tired. Then one night I was at the main building by myself. It really is a beautiful building, and there are a lot of items that are original and belong to the family, like furniture and artwork. I was looking at some of the things when I heard what sounded like a child crying. I knew there were no kids in the building. It didn't sound like a baby, more like a little kid, maybe 5 to 7 years old, crying from being upset or hurt. I only heard it twice, then it was as if there was silence beyond what's normal silence. I felt a chill and the hair went up on the back of my neck. It's like that feeling, someone is behind you, and it was almost like slow motion. I turned around and there she was, this woman in an old-fashioned dress. I know my jaw dropped and I felt frozen just staring at her. It felt like a long time, but I know logically that it was only seconds. She was looking around like she heard that kid crying, and she had her left hand up to her face like she was upset. I saw her, and then she just faded away. That made the whole thing even scarier. I knew right away that I had seen Adelicia Hayes. Maybe she was looking for one of her kids who had died in the house. I never doubted my friend again. And in fact, we both had another sighting of the woman when we were together outside the mansion a few months later. We saw her out front, and the exact same thing happened. She just faded away. I've been convinced since that time that ghosts exist, and that Adelicia Hayes still stays around the old mansion.
The Belmont Mansion is really something to see, and that might be why Adelicia has returned in the afterlife. It must have been hard to leave and hard to sell, but now she has the freedom to come and go as she wishes, if it is indeed her haunting the place. Is Nashville's Belmont Mansion haunted? That is for you to decide. Like I said, Kelly, we need to get to Nashville together, and this is a place that's definitely on the list. I've been there before, and I didn't even know this place existed.
Oh, dear. Yeah, we're definitely going to hit this spot.
We'd love for you guys to check out our website at historygoesbump.com, and if you'd like to send some feedback, you can do that at historygoesbump@gmail.com, or of course you can leave comments on any of our social media, at our YouTube, or what have you, and we will share those as well. We did have James leave a comment under our Crow's Nest Pass episode, and I just love this. We have people that we know come and go. I do the same thing. I listen to podcasts for a while, and then I move on and listen to something else, and then I'll come back to a podcast, and that's what James has done. He said, I used to listen faithfully a few years back up until after when you went solo for a while.
Right.
Life gave you a curveball, and you've been able to knock it out. Well, life gave me a couple knuckleballs. Went from Louisiana to Michigan. Things got dark, but thankfully God kept me from harm. And now that I got a new job, I'm able to listen to all my favorite podcasts at work. I think Kelly's a great addition and glad y'all are happy. Can't believe it's been 7 years. Love you ladies. Enjoy the show and can't wait to get caught up.
Thank you, James.
Yeah, we really appreciate that. Welcome back. And we are definitely glad that when things got dark that you didn't go down a certain path, and glad to have you here.
Absolutely.
And then Jeremiah shared over in the crew, I just listened to the Hamilton House episode. Amazing. I was so shocked as the episode got started. Kelly said that Doc Hamilton moved to a house on a street now called Henderson Highway. I got so excited. When I was a practicing Mormon, I was a missionary in the north end of Winnipeg. I was there in fall and winter of 2003-2004. It only got to negative 42 degrees Fahrenheit that winter. LOL. Only. I only lived a block from the Elmwood Cemetery and a few steps further from the Hamilton House. Little did I know I was living that close to an amazing haunt. I walked past the Hamilton House hundreds of times. I had no idea. Looks like I'm planning a trip back to Winnipeg. I've loved cemeteries as long as I can remember, Elmwood being one of my favorites. I loved walking through it. It was so peaceful standing in the cemetery on the bank of the Red River while the sun would set. Oh, I bet that was a gorgeous picture. I loved taking photos, and I took some of the Elmwood Cemetery. I only have a few pics left from the roll of 35mm film. Digital cameras were just starting to become more affordable, but quality wasn't great, so I shot on film. In 2 of the pics, I took double exposure photos to make it look like I'm a ghost. LOL, I only wish I'd known about and taken pictures of the Hamilton House. I love the picture. I'll grab one of them and throw it up on Instagram. Because when we first looked at it, I didn't realize that he had actually meant for it to happen. We're like, wow, it looks like looks like him, but he's like kind of transparent.
Yep.
And he also shared that he loves what we do and we make his days better. So we are so glad, and you guys make our days better as well. I want to thank you guys for tuning into this episode. I've been your host, Diane.
And this has been Kelly.
You take care now. Bye-bye. This episode is brought to you by our executive producers.
Dispatches from the Grave Digger.
We want to welcome into the cemetery Michelle with 1 L, Razor. We hope we said your last name right. You're going to be placed in a chest tomb, and welcome back to Felicia Pittman. We're going to be putting you back into your garden crypt. It's been waiting for you. You'll see that Mort has taken very good care of it.
Thank you so much for supporting History Goes Bump.
Sweet dreams.
and her husband, Isaac. So,
And her husband?
oh, sorry. Tragedy struck again in 1855 when the last surviving child from her first marriage, Emma, passed away.
Pabst. Are you thinking about some really cheap beer?
I guess. I don't know.
A water tower fed water via gravity to